The moment the judge read the sentence, it wasn't the sound of the gavel that broke him. It was the specific, cheap scent of the paper his assistant had printed the evidence on, a scent he recognized from the supply closet 5 years earlier.
Elias Thorne did not deal in small numbers or loud emotions. His empire, Thorne Global, was built on the premise of silence, the kind of silence you find 90 stories above Manhattan, where the roar of the city is reduced to a dull, manageable thrum.
He was 43, impeccably tailored, and profoundly disciplined. Control was not just his philosophy, it was the atmosphere he breathed, the foundation of every trade, every acquisition, every interaction.
For 12 years, the keeper of that silence was Serafina Voss.
Serafina was not merely an assistant, she was the operating system of Elias Thorne's life. She scheduled his days down to the second, anticipating necessities before they materialized.
She knew the names of his mistresses and the precise location of the safe deposit box in Geneva.
She signed contracts that moved millions, fielded calls from senators, and managed the delicate ecosystem of the Thorne Foundation, a necessary veneer of philanthropy covering the sharp edges of his true business.
She had the capacity to become invisible. Her movements in the mahogany and glass office were fluid, almost ghost-like. She spoke softly, efficiently, never repeating herself. Elias saw her as an indispensable machine, an extension of his own will.
He paid her an astonishing amount of money, an amount that bought her discretion, her loyalty, and most importantly, her silence.
Elias's secrets were woven into the very fabric of Thorne Global. They started small, creative accounting, aggressive tax avoidance. They grew into market manipulation, insider trading that bent the rules until they snapped, and finally, the quiet, strategic crushing of smaller, ethical competitors.
These secrets were not stored digitally. They were contained in a heavy, navy blue leather binder, secured in a custom-built safe behind a wall of abstract art in Elias's private library. Serafina knew the combination to the safe. She knew the weight of the blue binder. She had seen the photocopied evidence of the shell companies, the coded ledgers, and the signed consent forms that implicated partners who believed they were untouchable.
She didn't just know the secrets, she understood the architecture of the deception.
For years, this knowledge was sterile. It was data. It was her job. She was paid to keep the system running. Knowing the dirt underneath ensured job security. Elias depended on her competence, and she depended on his need.
It was a perfect, mutually assured relationship of silence.
The subtle crack began not with a financial misstep, but with a piece of human consequence. It was November. A minor acquisition. A small, innovative clean energy company in Oregon named Solstice Tech. Elias wanted their patented battery technology. Solstice Tech's founder, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch, refused to sell. He believed in the company's mission over profit. Elias ordered a tactical, brutal, hostile takeover, orchestrated to bankrupt Finch, forcing a distressed sale.
Serafina executed the maneuvers flawlessly, coordinating the legal pressure and the market shorting. The process took 3 weeks.
When the deal closed, Finch lost everything. Not just his company, but his reputation, his family's savings, and, as the internal notes reported, his health.
2 weeks after the final asset transfer, a minor email, routed through Serafina's inbox before being deleted, noted the founder's hospitalization, a quiet heart attack brought on by acute stress.
Elias saw the memo. He nodded, satisfied. "Clean up the loose ends, Sarah," he'd instructed, without looking up from the stock ticker.
Serafina paused. She did not nod immediately. For the first time in 12 years, she felt a profound disconnect between the execution of the task and the outcome.
The numbers had turned into a face, a consequence that resonated far outside the high-altitude bubble of Thorne Global. The sterile data had become tragedy.
She looked at Elias, sitting behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian, a man who believed consequence only applied to others. She realized the full, cold weight of her complicity.
She wasn't just managing secrets. She was enabling destruction.
That night, for the first time, Serafina stayed late, not working, but observing. The office was quiet. The cleaning crews had gone. She walked into Elias's library. She stood before the abstract art, her hand resting on the cool surface.
She knew the combination. She had known it for a decade. She didn't open the safe that night, but the knowledge had changed. It was no longer a professional detail. It was a moral weight.
The subtle crack began to widen, quietly, over the next 3 months. Serafina started a new routine. Every piece of sensitive, damaging communication, transcripts, encrypted messages, offshore transaction records, she made a redundant physical copy.
Not in the blue binder, but in a separate, inconspicuous manila envelope tucked away in her own apartment safe. She was building an alternate map.
Elias, acutely attuned to the atmosphere of control, sensed a shift. Not in her efficiency. Serafina was incapable of professional slip-up, but in her presence. Her silence, once deferential, now felt guarded. When she brought him his custom-blended tea, her gaze was level, not lowered. It was the look of an auditor, not an employee.
He didn't confront her. Elias never confronted. He observed. He tested.
He tasked her with retrieving a crucial document, a fabricated timeline for a regulatory body, a document only she knew the location of. When she returned it within minutes, he watched her hands. They were steady, too steady.
Elias understood that the greatest threat was not external investigation, but internal betrayal. And the internal betrayal that mattered was not born of greed, but of principle. He knew Serafina didn't care about money. She had enough. He understood she cared about order, logic, and consequence.
The irreversible event came in the spring. A high-profile investigation opened into a rival firm, Blackwood Capital. Elias had been tangentially involved in a few of Blackwood's aggressive ventures. He watched the news coverage with cold detachment, assuming his distance would protect him.
But the pressure mounted. Subpoenas were flying.
Elias called Serafina into the office on a Sunday morning. The skyscraper was deserted. The air conditioning hummed the only sound.
"Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "The Blackwood investigation. Do we have any?" She knew he wasn't asking about legal exposure. He was asking about documents that could connect him, regardless of legality.
She looked him directly in the eye. "If they proceed far enough down the third layer of shell corporations, Mr. Thorne, yes. The evidence linking Thorne Global's purchase of Baltic debt futures to the Blackwood scheme is contained within the blue."
He didn't deny it. He didn't explode. He simply leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly. "And the blue binder," he stated, "is still."
"It is," she confirmed. A long silence settled, thick and oppressive. It was the moment of complete mutual transparency. He knew she knew the exact path to his ruin. She knew he understood she could initiate it.
"There is something you need to understand, Mr. Thorne," Serafina said, her voice retaining its professional pitch. "The consequences of the Blackwood situation are not abstract. If they find you, they will pursue the entire structure. People will lose pensions. Reputations that were not earned dishonestly will be destroyed simply because they touched your." She wasn't threatening him. She was laying out the logical projection of the catastrophe.
Elias steepled his fingers, staring at the panoramic view of the city he owned. He saw the geometry of the situation. He could fight Serafina. He could destroy her career, threaten her life, or frame her. He had the resources.
But he realized two things instantly. If he fought her, he would be acknowledging the evidence was real, and the fight itself would draw attention. 2. Serafina, driven by principle, would execute her plan regardless of the threat. She would not stop.
She had become the irresistible force to his immovable object. And in that moment of realization, Elias Thorne experienced the total collapse of control.
It wasn't a sudden, loud realization.
It was a slow, cold draining of blood.
All the years of obsessive management, of meticulous deception, had led him to this sterile, quiet office, facing the one person he could not control, because he had underestimated her moral compass. He had thought everyone had a price.
Serafina's price was integrity, and he had already spent it.
He pushed himself away from the desk. He walked to the safe behind the art, dialed the combination 642217, the anniversary of his first major acquisition. He pulled out the heavy blue binder.
He didn't hand it to her, he held it, turning it over in his hands as if weighing the physical mass of his failures.
Serafina, he began, the name sounding foreign on his tongue.
She waited.
You are correct, he conceded, the statement stripped of all arrogance. The fallout will be catastrophic, far beyond what the courts can clean up. The structure is too...
He walked over to the adjacent conference table and laid the blue binder down. He then produced a slender black folder from his jacket pocket. It contained several documents, each signed and notarized, dated the previous Friday.
This is the situation, Elias said, his voice low and steady, narrating the end of his life as if reading meeting minutes. You have the evidence. You intend to take it to the regulators, SEC, DOJ, probably the press.
Serafina did not confirm or deny. Her silence was confirmation enough.
Elias tapped the black folder. This folder contains the complete operational transfer of all non-liquid assets of Thorn Global into a temporary, irrevocable trust. You are the named...
Serafina frowned slightly. That was the only outward sign of her confusion.
It also contains a sworn deposition prepared by my private counsel, who remains unaware of the contents, believing it to be a legal contingency, detailing the complete timeline of the market manipulation involving Blackwood and 4 other operations.
It names me, and only me, as the architect. It absolves all lower management, all board members who were kept in the dark, and certainly...
He slid the folder across the table toward her. If you take this deposition and the blue binder to the DOJ tomorrow morning, you will achieve the fastest, cleanest possible.
You are... I am securing the consequence, he corrected her. You wanted justice. Justice, in this scenario, requires a single, accountable nexus of responsibility.
If you expose the entire network through regulatory filing, the resulting legal chaos will take a decade, destroy the company's value, and the victims, the pension funds, the small investors, will receive pennies on the dollar after the lawyers take theirs.
He walked back to his desk, retrieved a simple, antique brass key from his top drawer, the key to the private, non-corporate vault in Geneva, and placed it gently on top of the black folder.
If you submit this deposition, he continued, I go to prison immediately.
The company is stabilized under your trust leadership, and the majority of the liquidated assets, the ones tied up in legitimate holdings, can be directed toward restitution and stabilizing the affected funds. It is the most efficient, logical path to mitigate the damage
Serafina did not touch the folder. She looked at the key to billions he was willingly sacrificing. Why would you do? She asked. The question was not about strategy, it was about the man.
Elias stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, bathed in the sharp morning light. He had the distant, drained look of someone who had just survived a war he started.
Control, Serafina, he said, the word heavy with irony. I spent my life controlling everything outside of myself, the markets, the regulators, the narratives.
I realized, looking at the Finch situation, that I had completely lost control of the only thing that mattered, the ability to...
He turned back to her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of vulnerability, not desperation.
You were going to expose me out of principle. I am choosing atonement out of necessity. If I confess now, I control the narrative of the consequence. I ensure the maximum recovery for the victims, and I achieve the one silence I could never buy with money, the silence of...
He had preempted her move completely. She had planned to be the executioner, and he had volunteered for the sentence.
His surrender was his final, most profound act of control. He was guaranteeing the consequence, not avoiding it.
The deposition names you exclusively, he reiterated. It is airtight. No one will ever look past it. Your role, Sarah, will be as the indispensable administrator who navigated the crisis and stabilized the...
She finally reached out, her fingers brushing the cool leather of the deposition folder. The scent of the paper was fresh, expensive, unlike the cheap paper she had used for her secret copies.
Mr. Thorne, she began, struggling to find the appropriate professional address for this surreal moment.
The appointment is effective immediately, he interrupted softly. You have the blue binder. You have the deposition. Call the attorneys. Call the regulators. Tell them Elias Thorne is ready to turn himself.
He took off his custom-made titanium wristwatch, placed it on the desk next to the blue binder, and began to unbutton the cuffs of his shirt. He was simplifying, stripping down, preparing for a different environment entirely.
Serafina left the office not as an employee, but as the unwilling custodian of a collapsed empire. She had not had to raise her voice. She had not had to make a single public accusation.
The secret she held was so powerful, it had compelled the man who created it to destroy himself on her terms.
The transfer of power was absolute. She spent the next 2 days coordinating the legal submission. The attorneys were stunned. The speed and precision of the self-reporting were unprecedented.
Elias, calm and composed, walked into the federal building with his lawyer, offering no statement, simply handing over the confession and the supporting evidence.
The subsequent legal proceedings were shockingly swift. With the principal admitting guilt and providing complete cooperation, the focus shifted from investigation to recovery. The media frenzy was immense. The billionaire who confessed.
But the chaos Elias predicted was averted. Serafina, leveraging her 12 years of intricate knowledge, managed the trust with cold, objective efficiency. She liquidated assets Elias had deemed legitimate, redirecting hundreds of millions towards the impacted pension funds and the stabilization of Thorne Global's ethical divisions. In his final statement before sentencing, Elias offered a single sentence, devoid of plea or remorse, purely factual. I violated the trust placed in me, and I accept the full consequences of my...
He was sentenced to 25 years in a federal facility.
Serafina never visited him. Her transformation was restrained. She didn't seek the spotlight. She simply continued to manage the flow, ensuring the promised restitution was meticulously executed.
She was, in effect, running Thorne Global, stripping it down to its ethical core, selling off the dirty remnants, and healing the wounds Elias had inflicted.
1 year later, sitting in the vast, silent office that used to belong to Elias, now renamed the Thorne Restitution Trust, Serafina looked out at the city. She had gained unimaginable power, not through ambition, but through moral adherence.
She was richer, more powerful, and perhaps more trapped than she had ever been before. She was still the keeper of the silence, but now it was the silence of recovery, the silence of atonement. She often reflected on that final, quiet Sunday morning. Had Elias truly surrendered out of a moral awakening? Or was his confession merely the ultimate, final chess move, a way to ensure that even in his downfall, he dictated the rules of engagement, securing Serafina's cooperation and maintaining his narrative by sacrificing the game entirely? Perhaps the truest power isn't holding the key to the vault, but realizing that the only thing left worth controlling is the consequence itself. And Elias Thorne had controlled even that. Serafina closed the file on the restitution report, her work for the day complete. The city lights began to sparkle below. The heavy brass key to the Geneva vault, the one Elias had placed on the table, was still in the top drawer of her new desk. She had never used it. She didn't need the money. She only needed the assurance that the system was finally, logically, running clean. But there was one piece of the story Serafina never fully understood, the identity of the very first person Elias Thorne called from the processing center the day he turned himself in. It wasn't his lawyer. It wasn't a family member.
It was a single, cryptic number in a forgotten part of Europe.
That call, and the subtle shift in the global financial shadow network that followed it, suggested Elias's final surrender may have been less an ending and more the preparation for an entirely new, profoundly controlled beginning.
The question of who Elias Thorne was truly protecting with his sacrifice is a mystery whose threads stretch far beyond the walls of his prison cell, and the answer might be revealed sooner than anyone expects.
Stay with us, because the quiet life of an imprisoned billionaire may not be quiet for long. The story of the call Elias Thorne made from custody and the unseen power it unleashed is next. You will not want to miss the true cost of his freedom.